metropolitan Kansas City area. We provide support to our member organizations and education, information, and resources to the public on accessing quality health services. We host the Mental Health KC Conference every May, as well as provide free webinars on the second and fourth Thursday of every month. Please save the date for our Mental Health KC Conference, which is coming up in 2 weeks, May 23rd to 24th at the Johnson County Community College. We will have 70 breakout sessions and two keynote speakers. You can earn 8.25 contact hours plus lunch and snacks, all for only $50. You can register at www.mentalhealthkc.org, and I have listed the registration link in the chat box. Please note the slide that is in front of you, and keep in mind that the views and opinions presented are those of the speaker and not necessarily represent the opinions of Metro Council. At the end of the webinar today, we will put a link and a password to get the certificates of attendance for this webinar. So feel free to put in the chat your questions as well as in the QA box. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our speaker today. I'm excited to introduce Cindy Lamb. She's speaking on the journey to the mind. Cindy is also speaking at the Mental Health KC Conference. With a master's degree in social work and a bachelor's degree in English and secondary education, Cindy is a seasoned professional with over 2 decades of experience as a mental health practitioner and educator. Currently serving as the Director of Clinical Programs at the Family Conservancy, she expertly manages operations across practice locations in Kansas and Missouri, ensuring quality mental health service delivery. Alongside her professional commitment, Cindy runs a private practice specializing in psychoeducation on the brain and autonomic nervous system and their pivotal role in health and well-being. Cindy developed a passion for trauma care during her time in the field of organ and tissue donation, where she compassionately supported grieving families facing sudden and traumatic losses. This profound experience has driven her commitment to understand and elevate personal suffering, shaping a career devoted to the well-being of individuals and families. I'm going to let Cindy share her slides.
All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you for taking the time to be here. Really appreciate it, and I'm really looking forward to this hour together. All right. Hopefully you can see my screen. I'm going to be sharing a lot of information with you that I think will be not only valuable for your own personal growth and development, but this can also be readily applied to the work that we do with our clients. This is a very condensed version of a program that's actually 2.5 to 3 hours long. So just putting all the cards on the table up front that normally I would not progress through this quite as quickly, but I really want you to get the big picture. So let us begin. So for today, if you really want to get the most out of this presentation, try to hold and make space for these 4 states. Be curious about what I'm about to say and how it could impact you and your work. Remember that flexibility is needed in order for us to make shifts in how we think and feel and behave. Balance is absolutely essential. We know that the universe requires balance, that for any one thing to exist, its opposite must also exist in order for that balance to be present. So when we are out of balance, when we don't have complete balance in our biology and physiology, our body and our brains are constantly trying to regain and maintain that balance, which creates disease ultimately. So choice. You have a choice about how you show up and what that looks like at any given moment. And this presentation is giving you the tools to be able to do that. So you are more in control of your life instead of feeling that you're at the mercy of your emotions and thoughts. So let's begin. Who is in control? I think most of you on this webinar are probably clinicians, and you understand that a dysregulated individual cannot regulate another dysregulated individual. We must master our own minds, and through that, we can regulate and co-regulate. So if you think of the saying, put your own oxygen mask on first, that's definitely the case here. This is really an opportunity for growth, and it is not the be all and end all of the science. It is really just the tip of the iceberg, but I think it's a great place to start. I do want to give credit to Laura Johnson, one of the phenomenal therapists that I have the pleasure of working with, who said this: you cannot take your clients any further than you've gone yourself. And that is absolutely true. We as professionals need to grow and advance in our understanding of our minds and chemistry and biology to be able to apply that science to the work that we do and come up with better and better ways to alleviate suffering. So thank you, Laura, for that. I often say that that phrase. So essentially, the information that I'm going to share with you today is information you can put in your clinical toolbox. It will make you aware of the true power that you have to choose who you are and how you show up at any given moment on a biological and physiological level. So all that to say, here are our objectives. Really, by the end of this presentation, you should be able to describe the important differences between the left and the right hemispheres, be able to identify what are called the four characters of the brain and how they show up in your life, and how to convene what is called a brain huddle. And all of this knowledge should hopefully give you a greater understanding of how to regulate and co-regulate with clients, as well as in your personal life. So, true or false? I can't see you, and I'm sorry about that, but just a quick self-assessment. Do you feel like this statement is true or false? Our left hemisphere is our rational thinking brain, and the right hemisphere is our emotional brain. Give you just a second to think about that. The truth is that that's not correct. That is based on I think back in the early 1900s, this was the belief. But we, thanks to Dr. Jill Bolte-Taylor, have a much better understanding of what is actually happening in the brain and where things are housed. So the truth is that neuroanatomically, there are four groups of cells that make up the left and right thinking centers, which is our higher cerebral cortex, and the left and the right emotional centers, which is our lower limbic system. So both reason and logic and emotion are present in both hemispheres. Here's the key, though. What makes them different is the set of instructions that each hemisphere has on how to perceive and interpret the information it receives. And we'll go into a little bit the lens which each of the hemispheres has for how to interpret that information. All right. Again, many of you may already know pieces of this information that are executive functions that our brain developed from the bottom up. It comes online from the bottom up, and therefore, when we have early experiences of developmental trauma, those pathways and connections between the top and the bottom, the executive functioning in the limbic system, either don't develop at all or develop very poorly. And this shapes us for life. At our most fundamental level, aside from our physiological needs, we must have safety and attachment. We are social beings, and we require healthy attachment, and that allows us a sense of relative safety. the experience of unhealthy attachment in our formative years, it has a lasting effect on our brain development and our nervous system. So let's just kind of give a baseline to that information. So we know that as an infant and a baby and a child, a young person, we are dependent upon our primary caregivers to meet all of our needs. And when those needs are not met, or they're inconsistent, or there's a threat, the brain and nervous system are charged with keeping us safe. And the way that they help keep a child safe is through the development of survival behaviors and circuitry that are very adaptive and allow that child to survive. Uh, Unfortunately, as we grow older, the brain is unaware that we're not children anymore and we're not capable of protecting ourselves. And it goes ahead and it continues to run the same circuits that used to be adaptive and were needed for survival, but now they're maladaptive and they work against the development of healthy relationships. So that executive functioning, that higher order thinking that allows us to reason and contemplate consequences, problem solve, focus our attention. If that doesn't develop normally or is damaged, that part of your brain does not have access to that limbic system, it really limits what someone is capable of. So this is just a quick visual of the scans of two-year-old children. The left scan, the left side, you can see right here is there's lots of color, there's lots of activity happening in the cortex and the prefrontal cortex. That is normal, healthy development. That shows us that there is circuitry and wiring that is going back and forth, and it's healthy. You see on the right-hand side, this is a child who experienced severe neglect. So these parts of the brain are not connected to each other. They're not linking up. And that has a lasting impact into adulthood. And so if you think about the out of control behaviors or the over exaggeration, the response doesn't match the situation. When you come across these things all across, our personal lives, our professional lives, thinking about police and working with individuals who unfortunately have experienced these traumatic things as children, in reality, they don't have the circuitry set up to be able to respond any differently. And so that's why this research and this information is so, so important. And I know that right now, maternal mental health is incredibly active. The knowledge that this is something we need to focus on. This all ties into the ability of that child to get all of their needs met so that they can form a healthy attachment, grow up in safety, so these parts of our brain work the way they're supposed to as we grow. All right. Our two hemispheres. We have a duality. As I mentioned earlier, the universal law of polarity. Everything has an opposite. One thing cannot exist without the other. And that's what creates that duality, the continuum that exists. So as we get started, I would like you to just take a moment and think of someone in your life. It could be a personal relationship or a client, but someone that you struggle to communicate with or get along with, or someone that your interactions with them are really triggering. Just take a moment and think about that and jot down their name. And as we go through the rest of this program, I'm going to ask you to reflect on that relationship and become aware of how you show up to them, how they show up to you, and maybe there's another way you can interact to make those experiences less uncomfortable, less icky feeling. So hopefully you have that name down. I am going to show you something here. All right. I want you to take just a few seconds, maybe like 30 seconds, to look at both of these images and try to spot the differences, as many differences as you can. I'm going to be quiet for a moment and let you kind of take a look. Okay, now I'm going to ask you to do something different. I am going to ask you to spot the similarities. I want you to flip the switch and I want you to look at these images and identify all of the similarities between the two. Okay. This exercise had you moving from one hemisphere to the next hemisphere. When I asked you to spot the differences, you were operating out of your left hemisphere. And when you were looking at the similarities, you flipped and you were utilizing your right hemisphere. And that is important because remember, I said the set of instructions that each hemisphere has and those cells, how they interpret information and look at something is very, very different. Um, we live in a country and a society that is hyper focused on the left hemisphere. For centuries, we've been taught that the characteristics of our right hemisphere are not to be taken seriously or not to be paid attention to. We've been socially groomed that expressing this side of our humanity is woo woo, crazy, out there kind of a thing. And that's problematic because we have to be utilizing both sides of our brain to have that balance. Otherwise, our nervous system, our autonomic nervous system is constantly trying to pivot and regain that balance. And that causes other imbalances in our body, which is how we get disease. Mental, physical, emotional disease is a byproduct of the autonomic nervous system seeking balance because one thing's off, but then that has consequences for the other systems. I hope that makes sense. So let's take a look here. The left hemisphere. This is how it operates. This is the part of the brain that most of us access most of the time. We're operating out of this side of our brain because that is what we've been taught. This is real. This is what's important. This way of viewing things is how it is. So these might seem really familiar. We think very linearly. There's an order to things. It's sequential. They have to go in order. This needs to happen before this can happen. This is the part of our brain that gives us the mental construct of time, where we perceive things as having happened in the past or happening in the future or happening now. This is the part of our brain, the side of our brain that seeks individuality. This is the side that's about me, myself, and how I am in this space. This side of our brain is the side that understands language and words, and it looks for differences. It tries to find how things are not alike. That's the instructions that it has. What are the things that don't match up here? And ultimately, this is where our ego hangs out. That is a whole nother program talking about ego and its role in our lives. But kind of hold that in your mind for a minute. So, contrast. Let's go to the right side of the brain. The instructions that this side of our brain have about how to perceive and understand and interpret information is very holistic, big picture, looking at how all the pieces fit together. This part of our brain is a parallel processor. So whereas the left hemisphere takes in one piece of information at a time and analyzes it and then takes the next piece, this side of our brain is able to process multiple streams of information at the same time, which really has an impact on how we behave and think. So this side of our brain is the side that is present moment oriented. This is the mindful side of our brain. It's nonverbal. It thinks in pictures and it's intuitive. It looks at the collective, the we, the us, the togetherness, and really looks for similarities. Where's the common ground? Um, and just from those two descriptions, I'm sure you can readily see that we live in a left brain society, that's the value, that's how we're supposed to be. And these other traits are not as popular or acceptable. All right. Whole brain living. What is this whole brain living? So Dr. Jill Bolte-Taylor is a neuroanatomy researcher, an author, and the survivor of a left-sided brain stroke. So what happened was she observed herself having a stroke, being very familiar with the brain and the operations of it. She actually realized very quickly when she started to have the stroke what was happening. And from that, once she was fully recovered, she was able to expertly match out our brain in a much more holistic way and help our understanding of how the brain works. So this is that concept. This is the fruition of that work and that understanding. She's written 2 books. She wrote a book called My Stroke of Insight, which is about that going through that stroke and what she discovered and how, when she fully recovered, what she was able to map out and what the more information that she was able to glean from this. The next book that she wrote is Whole Brain Living, and that really talks about what I'm going to talk about today, the 4 characters, the 4 different quadrants of our brain, and trying to understand which part of our brain is really in control at any given moment. So I don't know if there's any questions yet, but I'm going to keep going, and hopefully we can come back and answer questions about any of these slides at the end. So whole brain living, it's the combination of the field of psychology and the science of neuroanatomy coming together to provide us with a much more comprehensive understanding of what's going on in our brain. Once you know this, once you understand and nurture each part of your brain, that relationship with the parts themselves and that collective power that they afford us can really help us foster our own cognitive, emotional, physical, and spiritual wellness. So it really gives us a lot of power. All right. So who are your 4 characters? What am I talking about here? The 4 characters, as Dr. Taylor broke them down, were into quadrants. So the left hemisphere, refer back to that thinks in language, it's the individual, looks at differences. That's your character 1 right here in this part of the brain. All right. The character 2, we go down to the emotional, that's down here in the back left. Then our character 3, which is also emotional, but understands and interprets information differently, is on this side of our brain. And then the character 4, when that's in control, we're operating out of this quadrant here. So it's sort of like a U. Let me grab this. I also want to mention, as we go through this, it's going to be important to name your characters for easy reference and recall. When you're doing the brain huddles, it's going to help you move through that process a bit more quickly and be able to shift and make adjustments as needed. So we're going to dive in. I'm going to talk to you about character 1. Keep in mind that there's a range, a continuum of the way that these characteristics express themselves. So there's a positive, adaptive expression of each of these qualities, and then there's the negative, maladaptive expression, and of course, everything in between. So character 1, this is a verbal, this is this part of the brain. Again, thinks in language, it's very linear, it's past and future based, it's constantly comparing past and future with what's happening now. It's the analytical part of our brain and likes detail, and it looks for differences. that judgmental part of us that can come out lives in this space. This is that punctual part, which I don't have. I'm lacking the punctuality. I've learned over the years to try and get better, but that is not the part of the brain that I generally operate out of. This thinks of me and what's in it for me and what's important to me. It is not concerned with anyone else. This is the part of us that needs to be really busy and like structure and order. If you like to label things, if you like to make lists and check off the list, that's the part of your brain you're operating out of, is this character one. So I'm going to give you some examples of a character one. If you can imagine, or if you know who some of these people are, we've got Neo, we've got Sherlock Holmes, we've got a couple individuals from Star Trek, and then of course we have Sheldon from The Big Bang Theory, if you're familiar with that. So what I'd like you to do now, just take a minute. I'm going to give you 1 minute. I want you to think about these questions and try and identify what that looks like in you, and also who in your life do you know that, they're totally a character one. This is how they operate all the time. So just take a minute and think about the traits, and I will flip back to the traits so that you can see those. Which ones do you recognize in yourself? What about those closest to you? When you think about that person that maybe you don't have an awesome communication and relationship with, are they coming out of their character one? Maybe not. Maybe those clients that you struggle to engage with or really make progress with, what could they potentially be coming out of this part of their brain? So be thinking about that. I'm going to go back to the list so that you can see those qualities, and just give you just a minute to jot down any answers to those questions I just presented. So just take 1 moment and do that. All right. I'm going to move on to the next one. Again, I know I'm moving through this material very quickly, but I really want to give you the big picture. I do have a longer presentation that allows for more exploration and collaboration with like a group, but I'm just going to zip through these things today so you kind of get the full picture. All right, now I want to talk about our character two. This part of our brain, that's this right here, the left hemisphere, lower left hemisphere, the limbic system back here. This is where our trauma lives. This is where cognitive distortions take up residence. This is the part of the brain that sacrifices itself so the full range of emotions can be experienced and expressed. It's often tempting to think this is a bad part of your brain, or to ignore it, or to feel shame for it. But I want you to keep in mind that, remember the opposites, they have to exist. So in order for the opposites of all of these things to exist, these characteristics have to live somewhere, and they are housed in that part of our brain. You can think about this part of your brain as your injured self, your hurt or traumatized child. And if some of this language is feeling a little familiar for those of you that know about and utilize internal family systems, they are related, but internal family systems is much more into the weeds than this particular approach. Think about how these show up. Use those same questions that we had earlier, and I'll show you some examples of character twos. We have Norman Bates. Pardon me, sorry about that. I've got a mouse and I've used the wrong one, sorry. So we've got Norman Bates. We have got Walter White from Breaking Bad, Professor Umbridge from Harry Potter's. We have Kathy Bates in Misery, if you've seen that, and of course the Grinch. Just a few examples to kind of get you thinking thinking about this. So when we look at these characteristics, this is the part of our brain that's very rigorous and constricted. It's the cautious part of us. It's fear-based. When we're fearful, when we don't feel safe, it's coming out of this side of our brain, this particular quadrant. This is the part of our brain that offers conditional love. I love you, but only if you do these things or say these things or operate in this way. If you don't, I withdraw my love. That's housed in this space. This part of the brain is also responsible for when we have doubt, or for those that have a bullying nature to them. This side of our brain is very righteous, and it can be manipulative. Um, it's selfish, can be very, very critical of self and others, and views things in black and white terms, right? It's either good or it's bad. It's either right or it's wrong. We're either superior or inferior. It has to label things in that way. Um, Generally speaking, this part of our brain shows up when there's some kind of a trigger from a trauma or an experience in the past. Sort of comes out as that defense mechanism, that way of being and behaving that was adaptive at one point, but now as we get older really causes interference with the relationships that we have and our ability to form healthy relationships. So let me give you, let me go back. Let me give you a minute to list out some of these qualities that you know exist in yourself. Again, thinking about the person that you identified earlier, do any of these characteristics feel familiar? So just take a minute and think through that. I'm sorry, guys. I was listening to some calming music and went to a commercial. I'm sorry. All right. So now that you've kind of got an idea of that, we're going to jump to character 3. Character 3. So remember, it's a U. So we got character 1, character 2, character 3. We're talking about the lower limbic emotional on the right side. This part of our brain is instructed to look at things very, very differently. The instructions this side have are really contrasted with the character 2 and how it looks at things. It's pretty much the opposite. This is our expansive place where we're open-minded, and we potentially, if you look at people who like to take risks and are adrenaline junkies, that's kind of where this is coming from. This is where unconditional love is housed. This is our supportive, kind characteristics. This is when we see all the possibilities and ways that things could be. When we're experiencing gratitude, when we feel like we're kind of going with the flow and we're not, interrupted by things that distress us, or when things don't go quite the way they're supposed to. When we're feeling creative and innovative, this is the part of the brain that we're using. This is the part of the brain that looks at the collective, the whole, seeks out equality, and is kind of that free spirit, and looks at things from a very big bird's eye view. This is the character that I operate out of most of the time. These characteristics are sort of where I live most of the time. And of course, I also express the other 4, but this is really where I feel most comfortable and where I live. So let's look at some possible characters. I will say it was quite difficult to find real people that people would know and recognize that have these qualities. So I did end up using mostly fictional characters to help you kind of gain an idea of what that might look like, how that might express itself in a personal way. So again, I just want you to take a few minutes, look at these characteristics, and answer those questions. What do you recognize in yourself? What do you recognize in others about how they and when they express this type, these particular qualities? What does your character 2 do, or excuse me, your character 3 do when it encounters another character 3? What does your character 3 do when it encounters a 2 or a 1? Um, Obviously, we don't have time for you to explore all of that today, but that's kind of where we want you to go. We want you to kind of become familiar with, oh, when I'm in this character and I experience someone who's more operating out this character, I need to make a pivot, or I need to just be aware that my approach might need to shift a little bit in order to ensure the best outcome. So I'll give you just a few minutes to take a look at these characteristics and try and identify them in yourself and when you show up like this. All right, moving on. I know it's quick. I would like to move on to character 4. Okay, that's that cortex side of our head, the executive functioning side, opposite the character 1, right? So when we think of those characteristics out of character 1, really going to pivot, and essentially it's all the opposite. The instructions that this part of our brain has of how to interpret and take in information. So rather than using language, this part of our brain learns in pictures, intuition. It appreciates and seeks experiential situations. It has no idea of past and future. There's no context there. It's always just now, present moment aware. This is where we like to kind of hang out when we're trying to meditate, or we're trying to kind of be mindful in the moment. This is the part of the brain we're trying to access, which oftentimes is really difficult because this side of the brain is constantly yapping and that internal dialogue and going and going and going. Brrr, that rabbit hole we sort of get pulled back into whenever we try to access this side because we're not used to it. We haven't been taught that that is a healthy, fundamental place that you need to also be incorporating into the way that you experience the world. Big picture again looks at things holistically rather than looking at dissimilarities. It looks for similarities. This is the part of us that is able to flex and flow, thinks of the collective, the we, the us, the spiritual side that we express. When we're being truly authentic, this is the part of the brain that's in control, and it's open to possibilities, just sees opportunity wherever possible. So very, very contradictory way of looking at things. I want to be careful not to give you the impression that a character 4 is a better than a character 1, because remember, there's a continuum of how these things express itself. So there's the positive, best expression of these characteristics, and there's potentially a negative implication, although the character 4 is just a little bit different, because being flexible and resilient and compassionate, there's not really a downside to those particular qualities. So again, let's kind of take a look at some examples of real people who you might be familiar with that exhibit these qualities. All right, you may recognize some or all of these individuals. We have Mother Teresa, we have Deepak Chopra, Eckhart Tolle, and Nelson Mandela. So that kind of gives you some context to the way that this might, how this might appear in actual behavior and interactions with these types of individuals who come at life through this part of their brain. And again, all I want you to do is to think about these characteristics, how they show up, when they show up for you, also with that person, maybe that you struggle to have positive communication with. What does that look like? Have you noticed them being in their character 4? Is that something that they do very often? How often do you access your character 4? Be thinking of those things. And I'm going to go back to the list so that you can take a look at those. right, I'm going to move forward. All right, so now you know kind of what each quadrant is about, how they interpret information, how they the input turns into the output. You can kind of see what that looks like. So the next step in this is go, okay, so what do I do with this? What do I do with this information? In Dr. Taylor's book, she talks about the brain huddle, and this is obviously an acronym that just happens to fit nicely with us talking about the brain. The first step in any situation where you're going to kind of try and be intentional about how you show up, so that it informs your higher good and the higher good of the individual you're interacting with. We all know that the vagus nerve is critical in sending the parasympathetic nervous system the signal that we need to calm down, we need to rest, we need to pull out of this heightened state, this sympathetic nervous system state, and relax. So, of course, the first step is the breath, focusing on that belly breathing, really allowing you to get grounded. Some of you may also be familiar with the 90-second rule. That is when we get activated, when that response happens from our limbic system that something isn't safe, a surge of chemicals go through our bloodstream, immediately go through our bloodstream. And if we engage with that fear, if we engage with those emotions, the body keeps sending those chemicals through the system. However, if you wait 90 seconds, if you can allow and accept that feeling and watch it pass, all of those chemicals are completely out of your bloodstream in 90 seconds. So you can sort of reset and get back to a place of balance. The next step, recognize, just sort of identify which part of my brain, what circuit am I running right now, and what circuit is the other person running? Where are they operating out of? Come to understand and try to be more intentional about what we choose to do and how we choose to interact. Once you've calmed yourself, you've taken your breath, identified sort of where you're coming from, where this other person that you're communicating with is coming from, appreciate whoever shows up. Don't be like, oh crap, it's my character too. This is terrible. I don't want to be in this state. Appreciate that you have all these options and collectively inquire between all four of those systems and go, all right, who is the best part to be handling this situation today? Which one of my characters is going to serve my higher good here? And that's really sort of when you get to the stage of the intentionality. Okay, this person is operating out of their character 2. I'm operating out of my character 3. How can I manage this situation to keep the conversation going, to stay calm, to ensure this is a productive interaction? And this is something you practice all the time. Now, initially, this isn't going to come naturally. This isn't something that you're just going to automatically be able to do. And frankly, most of the time when you're first learning this, it's not in the moment brain huddle. It's after the fact, sort of thinking through the interaction and beginning to identify which part of your brain you need to be working out of. I'll hold on that. Why do we do the brain huddle? What I was going to say, sorry, is that is one of the reasons why it's so important to name those parts of your brain something that is very easily able to be recalled. So if you know someone who's a character 1 and they're just like, they're solidly a character 1, maybe you want to name that part of your brain, that person's name. So you can, oh yeah, that's the person I'm behaving like, or maybe, like I said, a character, a fictional person, but something that's personal to you, because that is going to make it much, much easier to recall and to access that quickly. Obviously, I talked about the 90-second rule. Encourage and accept all four perspectives because they all serve a purpose and have a place. And when you're making a collective decision, holistically, the outcome feels better and it will likely be better because you're responding instead of reacting to a situation. It also really helps us frame not only how we feel, but how that other person might be feeling and what they might be going through. It allows us to have a bit more compassion and understanding. It's a way to help us stay curious and sort of push away that judgmental piece. So I'm going to briefly touch on this. I know that you guys know these things when we're working with clients, and even when we're thinking about ourselves, we have to consider Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So those physiological needs, those core base needs that we have, that has to be present and functioning in order for us to move up this chain. So when we look at safety needs, many times what happens, think of ACEs, think of social determinants of health. When those physiological needs are not met, we don't have a safe place to live, we don't have electricity, we don't have hot water, those kinds of things being absent keep us stuck from being able to move up the ladder. So those physiological needs need to be met first, and the safety needs. When those two things are disrupted, when we're early on in our life, it makes it very, very hard, again, to access that part of your brain that you need for learning, right? That hierarchical framework, this Bloom's taxonomy. So many of our methods for working with individuals are top-down methods, meaning this part of our brain kind of takes control and communicates down. The problem with that is people who are stuck in these brain states, these lower brain states, don't have access to the cortex. So we're doing CBT or DBT, and we're doing these methods that sort of require you to access the top first, and then it trickles down. They're not going to be successful. They're not going to feel successful, and therapy might be very frustrating for them. So just really keep in mind the phrase Maslow's over Bloom. Your hierarchical needs need to be met before learning and growing in that respect can really take place. So this is just an idea of how to apply it. Obviously, hold the brain huddle. Who's best suited to show up right now and allow me to move forward for my higher good? Maslow's over Bloom. Remember that if someone is unable to regulate, using top-down methods to help them improve their life is going to be minimally successful, if at all. And then 3, look at their capacity, look at their history, do that psychobiosocial assessment, figure out their ACEs, listen to their story, and then you'll be able to see they're behaving this way because they're running this circuit. They don't have access to this part of their brain. Now, that doesn't mean people aren't accountable. Obviously, people need to be held accountable, but having an understanding of why someone is the way they are, I think it goes a long way for us to foster that compassion and set the stage for building that trust. All right. Final thing here. Go back, think of the person that you named when we first started, and try and tease out some of this information. Have you gotten any insights? Is anything more clear for you? Have you identified a way that you might do things differently? Those are the kinds of things just to sort of help you get started. All right. Well, again, just a little bit of a guide here about how you can get to know those parts of your brain and become much more familiar with them. The who are you box here. Are you an exile? Are you a manager? That is internal family systems language. And as I said, this model dovetails with that practice. However, it's much more global and general, whereas the managers and the exiles and the wounded and all of that, that is really down to the detail and experience level. Thinking about how you show up. Where are you? How often do you spend time in each of those areas? Is there a part of your brain that the rest of your brain shuns or doesn't want to engage with? These are just ways that you can start to apply this in your own, sorry about that, in your own lives and in your work with clients. All right. I know that was so fast and a ton of information to digest. But I'd like to give you guys time to ask questions and hopefully try to answer those for you. I will stop sharing.
Okay, thank you, Cindy. That was an excellent presentation. Very interesting information that you shared. Made us think in terms of our brains a little bit differently. Want to give everybody a moment to go ahead and put in the chat or in the Q&A any questions that you might have for Cindy. I am going to put in the chat how you can obtain your certificate of attendance, the link that you can click on, as well as the password that you can make to do so. So we'll just give everybody, this is a judgment-free zone. So feel free to enter any of your questions and we'll give everybody a moment to do so.
Even if you feel like sharing one of the characters that you identified and you want to share what you decide to name it and how you're going to recall it. I really want you guys to hopefully apply what we're talking about here because it really can transform your quality of life quite a bit.
We had a question as far as, can you get a copy of the slides? We're going to make this recorded webinar. This is going to be on our mentalhealthkc.com website, so you'll have access to that information. So just feel free to access that website.
I'm surprised there are no questions. Usually when I share this information, there's a lot of people with a lot of questions about the application of this information.
And I typed the website of the mentalhealthkc.com. So if you need to get a hold of those slides in that recorded webinar, you can obtain it that way.
If no one has any questions, I guess we all get 7 minutes of our day back. I do appreciate every one of you showing up. And as I said as I showed on the last slide, if you have an interest in learning more about this or getting sort of the full comprehensive training, please just reach out to me. I think this information is so vital to share and people to understand how imperative it is that we understand what's happening and not penalize and be punitive to individuals who literally lack the capacity and the wiring to behave in an acceptable way. We've gone down the wrong road there.
Okay, we do have some questions.
Okay.
Not a question, but I noticed that when I deal with a difficult person I named, I'm also in the same character. Is that common?
You know, there's no usual with this type of information. It really depends on, you know, how those early relationships shaped you, whether or not you're more inclined to act out of one part of your brain or another. It doesn't surprise me, the character ones kind of conflicting with each other, because again, that's our society. That's a cultural norm that those characteristics are valuable, right? Climb to the top, you know, power, you know, how can I do something and really be individualistic. So being out of your character one most of the time, you've really been conditioned to operate out of that part of your brain most of the time.
Is it possible for someone to be more than one character?
Absolutely. You can have, if you have if in your brain, there's already some collaboration and crossover between different characters, it's very possible you might hold in one space certain initial impression or views or thoughts about something and be able to easily sort of pivot to a different. part of your brain to kind of view it from a different perspective. If you have kind of intuitively know how to do that, or just find that that sort of comes more easily to you, you're probably more used to accessing that right hemisphere. But it's not uncommon at all for the left hemisphere to be both the character 1 and the character 2 to be running the show and deciding how we're going to behave and function from a automatic response, or when we're not thinking, when we're reacting, it's going to be in that especially character 2, but certainly on the left side of your brain.
Okay, in the time we have remaining, could you address application?
Can you give me a little bit more? Like how to apply it in your life, or how to apply it with your work with clients?
Well, someone is either.
Okay, so remember when I was talking about Laura and that phrase that she always says that I've stolen is, you can't take your clients any further than you've gone. The application is the practice of it, the naming of it, becoming familiar, recognizing which part of your brain you're coming out of at any given time. Once you have that knowledge, once you have that awareness, you are more capable of sharing what that looks like with your clients, because you can help them navigate those parts of themselves a lot better if you yourself know how to navigate your parts and your brain. So I think really the first most important part is to have an awareness of your own brain states and what part of your brain is usually in control, and what's the outcome. What is the usual response? When you're operating out of that part of your brain, do you get what you need? Do you burn bridges? What happens? And really looking at it from that lens of, is this really the part of me that I want to be in control right now? Up to this point, I think many of us have felt like we were at the mercy of our emotions and our experiences, that once those thoughts and feelings come up, we just sort of go down the river with it because that's how we feel. But we do have choice. We do have the ability to stand back, be that third person observer, and go, okay, let's take a look at this situation and which part or parts of me need to be in control to ensure that this interaction is the most positive and helpful one I can have.
We also have another question. What strategies would you recommend when working with character 2?
Love on it. Show that part of your brain love and compassion. Remember, that's where our trauma lives. That's where our hurt and our pain live. And they have to live somewhere. Those things have to live somewhere, because if they don't exist, the positive, wonderful expression and the best of life can't exist. And so leaning in, showing that part of yourself compassion and understanding, you'll be surprised if you pivot how you're viewing those characteristics when they show up and how they show up. If you show that understanding and be like, I absolutely get why you feel this way, and it makes sense to me. Many people find that that part sort of sets back and quiets down a little bit because it's been heard. Oh, what? You're not going to shun me? You're not going to say I'm bad? You're not going to push me away and not try to deal with me? Oh, that was okay. I don't really have a lot of teeth at this point. So I would say that you will very often, if you do the same thing you would do with your client, if they're shaming themselves, if they're feeling bad, if they're saying I'm not good enough, if they're, any of those things, do the same for yourself. Treat yourself the way that you have been taught to support clients.
Oh, well, thank you, Cindy. Thank you so much for your presentation and answering all those questions. We look forward to seeing you in person at the Mental Health KC conference, and Cindy will be there presenting on May 23rd to 24th. Take care and have a great afternoon.
Thank you.